Tonight, we uncover a story buried beneath centuries of faith, a rivalry older than any religion, and a secret that may change everything we think we know about divine power. They say the walls of Rome hold every secret, but some are buried far deeper, tucked into stone chambers where incense mixes with dust and memory, and where the echoes of long-dead voices cling like candle soot to ancient marble. You walk slowly through the Vatican courtyard, the flagstones still warm from the day's sun, carrying that strange anticipation that always creeps in when a place seems too quiet for its own history, and you feel the weight of a mystery humming under your feet, humming like a choir practicing off-key 3 floors below. You breathe in the heavy scent of nighttime Rome, olive smoke drifting from distant kitchens, cool stone, and that faint, crisp, metallic whisper that always seems to accompany stories about hidden gold. And you step deeper into the heart of the world's smallest country, knowing perfectly well that if legends are true, the ground beneath your shoes once served as a backstage for some of the darkest corridors of 20th century power. And yes, somewhere in this labyrinth sits the rumor you came for. Vatican gold that should not exist, gold allegedly touched by Nazi ambition and wartime desperation, gold that crackles through the historical record like static. As you walk past shuttered frescoes and silent Swiss guards, you can practically feel centuries leaning in to listen, curious about what you're about to uncover, and you can't help but think that you probably won't survive this, at least narratively, emotionally, or in terms of plausible deniability. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and while you're at it, tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now, because I always love seeing the map light up with your comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as you descend the first short stone staircase toward the apostolic archives, the air turning cooler with each step, making you wonder whether you've dipped into a vault or just time-warped into a medieval basement that still hasn't been introduced to central heating. You trace your fingers along the smooth limestone walls, and everything feels charged, as if each stone remembers exactly who touched it, and exactly which secrets were whispered here during the war years when Rome was occupied, watched, threatened, and negotiating its own survival. Somewhere in these archives lies one mainstream fact historians agree on. In 1943 and 1944, during the German occupation, Vatican City was officially neutral. Though neutrality is a charmingly flexible word when entire armies are using your borders like chessboard edges. And yet, neutrality doesn't stop rumors from crawling under locked doors, doesn't stop whispers about treasure convoys passing through Rome, doesn't stop the suggestion, quirky, fringe, and deliciously dramatic, that monks once used hollowed-out hymnals to smuggle coded ledger sheets referencing wartime gold transfers, the kind of strange detail that seems too bizarre to be invented yet too theatrical to be entirely trusted. You pause at a doorway, lifting your lantern. Because let's be honest, a lantern is simply more atmospheric than a flashlight, and the amber glow lands on a bronze relief depicting an angel weighing souls on a scale, which feels awkwardly symbolic considering you're here to question whether other scales weighed bullion that didn't belong to the church at all. You keep moving, the corridor narrowing, the ceiling lowering like an old cathedral bowing its head, and you can almost hear the ongoing scholarly debate phrase that hangs over this entire story. The degree to which the Vatican financially benefited from Axis-linked gold remains unresolved, a polite academic way of saying we're still arguing about it at conferences between coffee breaks and awkward handshakes. You reach a locked gate, iron bars, medieval aesthetic, probably installed because someone in the 1600s was really into the whole dungeon chic look, and you imagine what papers sit behind it. Letters from terrified priests during the occupation, secret diplomatic memos, maybe a receipt or two that someone wished hadn't survived, the sort of document that makes archivists sweat. The lantern's glow touches dust motes floating like small spirits, and you're suddenly aware of how long you've been walking in silence, how the entire building seems to pulse with its own heartbeat, slow, and ancient. You sense that if you listen carefully enough, you might hear murmurs about the real shipments of gold looted by Nazis from victims across Europe, shipments that traveled southward through mysterious channels, occasionally brushing up against Rome in ways historians still piece together with the enthusiasm of people building thousand-piece puzzles in dim candlelight. You step forward and feel a faint tremor through the floor, probably just a passing scooter outside because Rome is allergic to silence. But your storyteller brain insists it's something older, something like history shifting its weight. The deeper you go, the more you imagine wartime nights when Vatican messengers hurried down these same hallways, carrying letters from bishops trapped behind German lines, or when intelligence officers from multiple nations used the neutral territory as a politely disguised spy marketplace. Your breath slows as you absorb the uncanny atmosphere, frescoes peeling like tired eyelids, lantern reflections shimmering across marble, a cross hanging on a wall with the slightest tilt, as if even it grew weary of gravity's expectations. The scent changes again, now tinged with old paper, beeswax polish, and something faintly metallic, which may or may not be your imagination, conjuring the idea of buried gold. You take one more step, and the corridor widens into a chamber, the kind of room that looks like it was designed for secret conversations between people who absolutely do not want to be seen together, the sort of place where a papal envoy and a nervous German diplomat might have awkwardly exchanged information, trying to pretend their intentions were noble while the world outside burned. Your pulse picks up a little, not from fear but from the emotional gravity of standing in a room where so much went unsaid. The lantern flickers, throwing shadows that feel almost alive, and you remember, because your mind loves callbacks, that earlier whisper of wartime monks and their suspiciously hollow hymnals, realizing that even if that rumor is exaggerated, it reflects a larger truth. Desperate eras inspire desperate improvisations, for good or for catastrophic moral compromise. A draft brushes your ankles, cold enough to break the spell, and for a second you picture all the historical actors who passed through here, popes, spies, refugees, soldiers, each leaving an invisible trace, each tied to a world where faith tried to coexist with fear, diplomacy with brutality, compassion with survival, and where the Vatican's relationship with the Nazis remains an unresolved tangle of archives, testimonies, and suspiciously missing documents. You breathe deeply, feeling the chamber press in on you, feeling the past tug your sleeve like a restless child demanding attention, and you let the weight of everything settle as you turn your head toward the next doorway, knowing this story is only beginning and that somewhere in the darkness ahead, the vaults are still whispering. You step out of the narrow chamber and into a dim Vatican corridor where shadows curve like ink spilled by an impatient historian, the air still cool enough to make you feel as if the building itself exhales around you, guiding you deeper into the story as softly as a priest closing a confessional screen. And you keep walking with the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone who knows that the second you hesitate, the secrets behind you will try to crawl back into silence, so you push forward, letting the echo of your footsteps blend with the timeless hush of Rome at night. The deeper you move, the more the atmosphere shifts into that uncanny twilight zone where history lingers like perfume, and every archway feels slightly too tall, every fresco slightly too watchful, every shadow slightly too eager to follow. You sense something familiar tugging at you, something from the previous hallway, as if the old stones themselves remember that rumor about hollow hymnals and are now quietly judging you for believing it, though you decide not to take it personally because this whole building has been judging visitors since the Renaissance. Your lantern glow stretches across a fresco depicting angels and martyrs, their faces luminous and calm, yet somehow you can't shake the feeling that at least one of these painted figures absolutely witnessed someone sneaking down this hallway in 1943 carrying a document they weren't supposed to have, because tonight you're tracing paths once used by diplomats, spies, clergymen, and opportunists, all weaving through the same shadows that now seem to cling to your back like oversized, overdramatic cats. You round a corner and notice the faint vibration of Rome outside. Distant motorbikes, humming neon signs, a late-night street vendor boxing up roasted chestnuts for the 3,000th time, contrasting sharply with the Vatican's interior where time feels like thick honey, slow and golden, folding the present into the past until you're not entirely sure where one ends and the other begins. This is where the wartime story deepens, where Rome's occupation in 1943 isn't just a historical fact, but a heavy scent lingering in the hallways, and you recall the one mainstream point every historian agrees on. The Vatican remained officially neutral throughout the conflict, a diplomatic tightrope so thin it may as well have been a thread plucked from a Renaissance lute. Yet neutrality didn't mean isolation, because the German military presence outside these walls pushed Rome into a strange half-light, where spies slipped into churches, soldiers guarded monuments, and priests delivered messages with coded footnotes disguised as harmless scripture references. As you pass an iron-latticed window, moonlight spills through like pale wine, brushing the floor with silver, and you swear the shadows stretching behind you shape themselves into faint silhouettes. Men in trench coats, clerics in worn cassocks, couriers clutching envelopes that might contain pleas for help, intelligence reports, or careful negotiations that no one wanted to admit existed. You continue walking because stopping now feels like tempting the building to swallow you into some hidden alcove reserved for people who know too much. A musty draft flows through the corridor, bringing the scent of old parchment and beeswax polish. But layered beneath that is something sharper, metallic, as if a memory of gold once passed through here. Or perhaps your imagination is simply enjoying the drama, though you refuse to dismiss it because even fringe rumors contain the emotional truth of an age pressed into secrecy. One such quirky detail nudges your mind: the whispered claim that a certain archivist, unnamed in public testimony, used to hide sensitive wartime letters beneath a collection of perfectly innocent-looking choir robes, robes which, according to legend, had pockets deep enough to hide anything from ledgers to ham sandwiches, a detail so oddly specific that even the most skeptical historian tends to raise one eyebrow and say, well, it is possible. The corridor widens into a gallery filled with statues whose carved gazes seem fixed on something behind you, though you refuse to look back because you already know that whatever follows you isn't a person, but history itself, tugging gently like a child pulling a parent toward a secret they shouldn't share. You move between the statues, feeling their marble eyes analyzing your every breath, and the soft ASMR hush of your footsteps becomes almost hypnotic as the story tightens around you. Somewhere in these halls, scholars still argue, still politely duel over espresso, about the unresolved archival gaps and the debate phrase you can practically hear whispered by experts in conference rooms around the world. The extent of Vatican awareness regarding Nazi gold movements remains highly contested, which is academic code for nobody can agree, everyone has theories, and if you mention it on camera, someone will definitely send you a strongly worded email. You keep walking as the lantern casts elongated shadows that flicker like restless spirits, and you imagine wartime nights when Rome's blackout curtains transform the city into a maze of barely lit alleys where messengers hurried between embassies, monasteries, and safe houses, carrying documents that blended humanitarian pleas, intelligence reports, and financial negotiations into a tangled narrative that still frustrates anyone attempting to untangle the moral lines 70 years later. You pause at a heavy wooden door adorned with intricate carvings, saints, vines, and strangely enough, what appears to be a depiction of a fish wearing a crown, which you assume is either a symbolic metaphor or someone in the 1500s decided to have a little fun because artistry gets boring after 14 hours straight, and the door is slightly ajar, breathing out a stream of cooler air that brushes your face with the subtle chill of truth, waiting patiently to be acknowledged. You slip inside and find yourself in a long room lined with wooden cabinets, each marked with faded Latin labels, each containing some sliver of the church's memories, and your eyes trace the dust dancing in the lantern light like drifting snowflakes, reminding you that history is both delicate and stubborn. As you walk past cabinet after cabinet, you feel the tension of wartime Rome threading the air, a city caught between loyalty, survival, faith, and fear, where neutral ground served as both refuge and hiding place, where moral clarity slipped into gray mist as swiftly as incense rising from a candle. The floor creaks softly under your weight, and you notice a small, ancient desk in the corner, the kind that looks like it's held exactly 1,000,000 secrets and probably resents you for existing. And as you step closer, your fingers graze its surface, tracing grooves left by hands that may have signed letters begging for mercy, reporting atrocities, or recording transactions that scholars still scrutinize today. A small brass key rests forgotten in a drawer, cold, smooth, unremarkable, yet symbolic enough to make your chest tighten, because keys always hint at locked doors, and locked doors always whisper about things that should have been destroyed but weren't. You stand there in the hush, the lantern flame wavering slightly as if reacting to your pulse, and you let Rome's shadows settle on your shoulders, the ghosts of neutrality brushing against your sleeves, the weight of unresolved stories settling around you like a velvet cloak. As you turn back toward the gallery, you sense the building watching, waiting, listening as you carry the whisper of gold, the tension of wartime diplomacy, and the lingering uncertainty of a world struggling to reconcile its own contradictions. The corridor ahead is darker now, the lantern glow reaching only a short distance, but you step forward anyway, knowing the shadows are no longer simply following you. They're guiding you deeper into the hidden heart of the story you came to find. You descend a shallow ramp into a quieter, colder wing of the Vatican complex, where the air shifts into that unmistakable museum basement blend of old parchment, polished stone, and the faint ghost of incense long since burnt away. And as your lantern glow stretches ahead like an obedient little sun, you feel the entire atmosphere tighten, as though the building itself knows you're getting too close to something it would prefer you didn't understand. Something glittering and inconvenient and historically radioactive. You walk slowly, your footsteps cushioned by centuries of dust embedded in the crevices of thick marble tiles, and every sound feels amplified. Your breath, your soft movements, the subtle scrape of your shoe against stone, as if the silence here has been trained to spy on intruders. You glance at the walls lined with faded red tapestries depicting saints and miracles. And you can't help thinking that if any saint in history ever had to deal with financial scandals, missing ledgers, or off-the-books wartime transfers, they would absolutely be giving you that same mildly disappointed expression woven into the fibers overhead. The hallway narrows until it feels more like a vein than a corridor, pulsing slightly with the building's subtle vibrations. Maybe the hum of Vatican servers above you, maybe a distant generator, or maybe just history shifting irritably because you're about to open a chapter it has tried to keep closed for decades. The chapter involving gold that officially should not exist. Gold allegedly moved across borders, hidden in diplomatic pouches, or rerouted through church-affiliated institutions in ways that make accountants cry into their spreadsheets 70 years later. You feel the chill deepen as you approach a pair of double doors reinforced with iron crossbars, and you push them open into a storage chamber where the dust motes float like tiny planets orbiting your lantern. Row after row of wooden crates sit silently beneath vaulted ceilings, crates stamped with obscure inventory codes, dates, and the occasional Latin abbreviation that could mean anything from archives to don't touch unless you're a cardinal with insomnia. The space feels impossibly vast, a sanctuary of forgotten objects, and you walk through it with the same careful steps you might use inside a sleeping giant's ribcage, because this room holds the energy of things never meant to see daylight again. You set your lantern on a crate, the glow spilling across old metal clasps and splintered edges, and your fingertips skim the wood as you recall the mainstream historical fact that gives this entire legend its spine. Multiple independent investigations confirmed that the Nazis looted enormous quantities of gold from Jewish families, banks, and national reserves across occupied Europe, and a percentage of that plunder vanished from the official post-war tracking systems, leaving a glittering gap in the record that scholars still argue about with the enthusiasm of people who secretly enjoy conflict but pretend they're above it. You move deeper into the chamber, weaving between crates and shelves stacked with dusty ledgers, brittle maps, and tarnished brass instruments, absorbing the quiet heaviness of objects that witnessed eras more violent than their stillness suggests. With every step, you feel that strange tingle on your skin, the one that tells you a room is holding its breath, as if waiting to see whether you will take the next leap into the story's uncomfortable center. A soft scraping sound, just wood bending under its own age, draws your attention to a corner where one crate sits slightly askew, its lid not entirely closed, and you kneel to examine it, heart steady, breath calm, mind full of that sleep story rhythm, even as the narrative grows sharper around the edges. A fringe, quirky rumor rises in your memory, one that researchers mention with a smirk because it's both absurd and oddly persistent. The claim that certain wartime intermediaries disguised gold bars as thick, gilded devotional books, complete with faux bindings and embossed crosses, allowing them to move contraband bullion through checkpoints under the guise of religious cargo. An idea so theatrical you want to laugh, yet the visual pops instantly into your mind, gleaming books stacked innocently in a crate just like the one before you. You lift the lid with both hands, the wood protesting with a low groan, and inside you find not gold, not ledgers, but bundles of cloth-wrapped objects, icons, chalices, relic cases, ordinary items that fit exactly what belongs here. Yet the absence itself feels suspicious, as if whoever once stored things in this room made very sure the only crates left behind contained nothing scandalous. You close the lid quietly, and as you rise, your lantern's glow flickers dramatically, clearly enjoying itself, throwing elongated shadows across the walls where the painted saints now look more concerned than holy. You resume walking, stepping lightly as though the floorboards hold memories of clandestine footsteps, diplomats, couriers, clerics, moving through these same halls during Rome's darkest nights, each trying to outrun a war that wrapped itself around the city like a constrictor. The temperature dips another degree, and you turn into a smaller chamber lined with iron safes embedded in the walls like a mosaic of locked mouths refusing to speak. Each safe bears a number, a seal, or a scratched-off marking that invites speculation, and in the soft glow of lantern light, they resemble prison cells holding secrets instead of prisoners. The scholarly debate phrase echoing through your thoughts settles heavily here. The ultimate destination of untraceable Axis gold remains a point of ongoing controversy, which is academia's polite way of saying no one agrees and everyone suspects someone else of hiding something, a sentiment that fits this room perfectly. You press your palm against one of the safes, cool and unyielding, but the contact sends a strange ripple of awareness through you, not supernatural, just the emotional residue of knowing you're touching an object that sat here during the war, a silent witness to Rome's fear, its negotiations, its dangers, its desperate balancing act between moral authority and survival. You imagine the nights when footsteps echoed behind these walls, German officers outside the city, Vatican diplomats scrambling for information, Allied agents trying to coax intelligence from clergy who spoke in riddles, refugees clinging to hope as they sought sanctuary, all threads woven into the same tapestry that now hangs invisibly around you. You turn toward a narrow door at the back of the chamber, barely noticeable beneath a drape of shadow, and when you open it, you enter a passage so tight you have to angle your shoulders to fit, the stone brushing your sleeves as you squeeze through. Your lantern grazes the wall, illuminating faint scratches, marks left by hurried hands, or by carts pushed through during wartime nights when secrecy mattered more than ergonomics, and the constricted passage guides you downward, 1 step, 2 steps, 10 steps, until the air grows heavy with that metallic scent again, subtle but unmistakable. You emerge in a tiny alcove that feels like a forgotten punctuation mark, carved into the Vatican's architecture. And there, sitting on a stone pedestal, is a harmless wooden box, simple, dusty, unimportant. Yet its placement here feels ceremonial, almost theatrical, as if someone wanted it hidden but not entirely lost. You lift the lid slowly, letting the lantern glow spill inside, and though the box is empty, the emptiness itself feels like a message, a whisper that the real story was removed long ago, spirited away through some diplomatic corridor or wartime escape route that still lies buried beneath layers of denials and redacted files. You stand in that hush for a long moment, the darkness around you settling like velvet, and then you lift the lantern, turn back toward the narrow passage, and walk upward again, carrying with you the uneasy truth that sometimes the most damning evidence is the void itself, a void that now echoes behind your steps as you return to the main corridor, where the shadows of Rome trail behind you like silent companions waiting to reveal the next piece of gold-tinted mystery. You follow the corridor upward until the stone under your feet grows smoother, warmer, and slightly more polished, the kind of flooring that suggests you're moving closer to rooms meant for important decisions rather than dusty secrets. And as you climb, the air shifts again, losing its metallic bite and replacing it with a gentle waft of incense that clings to the back of your throat like a polite reminder that even in the murkiest historical moments, someone here was still burning frankincense as regularly as most people water houseplants. You step into a long Vatican hallway lined with portraits of popes, their solemn expressions painted with that particular Renaissance confidence that says, "I absolutely made at least one world leader cry," and the lantern light brings out the gleam in golden halos and brocade robes, turning the corridor into a catwalk of centuries-old authority. The deeper you walk, the more the portraits seem to narrow their eyes at you, as if they know the question lingering in the heart of this chapter, the impossible role of the Pope during the years when Rome trembled under Axis occupation, when neutrality was both shield and target, when every decision carried the weight of millions of lives. And even though you aren't here to judge, the tension in the painted faces feels almost palpable, like they are collectively inhaling before a confession that has been overdue for 70 years. You approach a tall wooden door carved with vines, keys, and the crossed insignia of papal authority, and when you push it open, you enter a room warm with lamplight, the walls lined with shelves of theological volumes and diplomatic correspondence, their spines worn by countless hands that once grappled with the moral impossibility of guiding the Church through a world set on fire. This is where the story tightens, where the mainstream historical fact lands with a quiet but undeniable weight. During World War II, Pope Pius XII maintained a stance of impartial neutrality, believing that public condemnation of Nazi atrocities might provoke harsher retaliation and endanger Catholics across Europe, a position that has since become one of the most debated moral dilemmas in modern religious history. You walk toward a large desk at the center of the room, its surface gleaming with that deep, almost oily shine that antique wood acquires after centuries of ink spills, quill scratches, and whispered negotiations, and you run your hand along its edge, feeling a faint vibration, not from the wood itself, but from the memories soaked into it. Diplomatic letters, frantic appeals for intervention, reports smuggled out of occupied territories in coded language meant to slip under the watchful eyes of censors and informants. The lantern flickers, throwing soft shadows across the walls, and you feel the room settle around you, humming with a quiet moral tension, the kind that presses into your chest like a gentle but insistent hand, reminding you that leadership is never simple, not even when draped in sacred vestments. As you drift toward a window overlooking the moonlit gardens below, a fringe detail rises to the surface of your thoughts, one of those odd theatrical tidbits whispered by archivists with half smiles because they're not supposed to talk about it. The claim that during the war, certain Vatican officials used coded references hidden inside classical Latin prayers to communicate with diplomats and resistance networks, a method so esoteric that it sounds like something dreamed up by a novelist or an especially overworked monk. Yet the rumor persists with enough detail to feel unsettlingly plausible. You stand by the window, staring out at the silhouettes of citrus trees swaying gently in the night breeze, and the lantern light casts soft gold onto the glass, turning your reflection into a ghostly figure hovering over Rome, a city once divided between occupiers, clergy, spies, refugees, and opportunists, all scrambling beneath the same moonlit sky. Somewhere beyond the gardens lie the old entry points used by wartime couriers slipping into Vatican grounds under cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by gravel paths, their documents tucked beneath robes or hidden inside hollow crucifixes, each carrying the heavy burden of truths the world wouldn't learn for decades. You turn back toward the desk, feeling the fabric of the story tightening around you like a gentle but unyielding thread, and you can almost hear the whispered scholarly debate phrase that haunts every discussion about this era. The extent to which papal diplomacy mitigated or enabled wartime atrocities remains deeply contested, a sentence crafted with academic politeness, yet carrying the weight of a moral earthquake, one that shakes even the calm of this quiet room. You walk toward a display cabinet against the far wall, its glass slightly fogged from age, and inside you see diplomatic gifts, ornate pens, embossed invitations, small boxes once carrying messages sealed with wax, their ribbons now faded to soft ivory. Each object feels like a fragment of a world trying to balance duty, secrecy, fear, and moral responsibility under the impossible pressure of total war. The lantern glow turns the objects into tiny suns in the dark, and your gaze lingers on a small ledger bound in cracked leather, its pages slightly warped from humidity. You pick it up and feel the fragile rustle of paper that once recorded discreet meetings, supply transfers, and relief efforts, its margins marked with cryptic initials that scholars still puzzle over with the same enthusiasm children apply to decoding cereal box puzzles. As you return the ledger to its place, a soft breeze drifts through a barely open side door, bringing with it the faint scent of old stone and something metallic, subtle but present, a reminder of the gold-threaded tension weaving through this entire narrative. You step toward the doorway and ease it open with your fingertips, revealing a narrow balcony overlooking the city, the rooftops glowing silver in the moonlight, and you inhale the cool Roman air, letting it settle into your lungs like a slow-burning memory. From this height, you can almost sense how the Pope must have felt during those darkest years, trapped between empires, between silence and condemnation, between neutrality and intervention, while the world demanded clarity in a time when clarity could cost countless lives. The lantern hums softly behind you, the night stretches endlessly before you, and the weight of this moral labyrinth presses gently onto your shoulders, as though inviting you to carry it for a moment. You turn back into the room, let the balcony door close behind you, and walk slowly toward the next hallway, knowing that the story ahead will only grow heavier, more tangled, and more drenched in the gold-tinted shadows that trail your every step as you move deeper into the Vatican's wartime maze. You step into a smaller hallway paneled with dark wood, the kind of corridor that doesn't appear on official maps but has clearly existed longer than most ministries. And as your lantern's glow slides across its polished surface, you see door after door, none labeled, all locked, each one humming faintly with the restrained energy of transactions that were never meant to be pastoral and certainly never meant to be transparent. The floor here is smoother, the air drier, and somewhere behind the walls you can almost hear the whisper of pen against ledger paper, the quiet flipping of bond certificates, and the cautious tap of cufflinks adjusting themselves beside typewriters whose ribbons once transcribed more currencies than catechisms. You pass a brass plaque so tarnished it's nearly unreadable, but the faint Latin still holds its shape. Institutum pro operibus religionis, the formal name of the Vatican Bank, and the very center of tonight's next unraveling thread, the room where charity, diplomacy, and speculation once braided themselves into something far less noble. The mainstream historical fact sits quietly at the edge of this hallway, like a well-behaved accountant in a pew. The Vatican Bank, officially created in 1942 under Pope Pius XII, was intended to manage church finances and humanitarian funds during wartime. But over the following decades, it became entangled in a series of scandals, opaque transactions, and alleged wartime transfers of looted assets that still remain the subject of scholarly and legal dispute. You ease open a side door into a dimly lit chamber, part archive, part office, part something more ambiguous. The walls are lined with cabinets, each drawer marked in a mix of Latin, Italian, and dry financial codes that seem designed less for order and more for plausible deniability. Your hand hovers over one drawer labeled Dona Extra Ecclesiam, 1943, and when you slide it open, the scent of wax, ink, and old linen floods the air, a mixture as sharp and ceremonial as a forgotten altar, but the documents inside are anything but sacred. receipts from foreign accounts, handwritten memos in German and Hungarian, and small envelopes stamped confidential, sealed so aggressively they nearly slice your fingers. Or you set them aside with care, lifting a slim ledger tucked beneath them, its pages filled with currency conversions between Swiss francs and lira, and in the margin of one page is a faint pencil notation, Osttirol, 17 kilograms, per IOR, a phrase that means little in isolation, but suddenly pulses with meaning when viewed against the broader pattern of gold transfers that may have slipped through the Church's own financial veins. A fringe rumor returns, quiet and unsettling. The claim that certain mid-level Vatican financial officers operated as unofficial liaisons between fleeing Axis collaborators and post-war European banks, brokering deals through church-linked institutions under the guise of processing refugee resettlement donations, deals which, conveniently, required no public accounting and were shielded by religious discretion. You place the ledger back into its drawer and look across the room at a glass display case housing a set of ancient coins and medals meant to symbolize papal history and global generosity. Yet here, tonight, they seem to shimmer with another meaning entirely, as though you're not looking at religious relics, but trophies from financial battles no one was ever supposed to win or lose in daylight. You continue toward the desk in the far corner, where a mechanical calculator still sits, its buttons worn, its surface dusty but not abandoned. You press one key out of curiosity and hear the soft clack of a machine remembering how to count, how to tabulate, how to build invisible bridges between morality and margin. Beside the calculator lies a business card encased in a cracked plastic sleeve. The name on it faded, the bank insignia partially scraped off, but the reverse side contains a phrase in Latin scrawled hastily in pencil. Numquam omnia dicuntur, never is everything told. The scholarly debate phrase floats beside you like incense curling from a brass censer. The full extent of Vatican financial knowledge regarding wartime gold transactions remains uncertain. A sentence designed to avoid litigation and sleep at the same time. You move through the room's final doorway into an adjoining archive filled with numbered boxes, and you trail your fingers across them, 1940, 1941, 1942, until you stop at a box marked simply Fiume. You lift the lid to find a bundle of telegrams, each one brief, each one technical, detailing the coordination of shipments from border towns during the final collapse of the fascist regime. And though the names are mostly redacted, the destinations listed include Rome, Milan, and occasionally sanctuarium, a term vague enough to be spiritual, specific enough to conceal a bank vault. You read one line twice. Cargo received at convent value verified by intermediary. Documents follow. You exhale through your nose, not in shock, but in recognition, because by now you understand the rhythm of this story, how whispers pass through corridors, how currency dresses itself in the clothes of compassion, how the halls of a sacred institution can be both sanctuary and corridor for things that don't belong in sunlight. You return the telegrams to their box, and before leaving, you glance once more at the desk, at the cracked calculator, the quiet drawer, the plastic-wrapped card, and you feel something settle into place. Not a revelation, not a conclusion, but a tone, a moral pitch that vibrates through the bones of this room like a cello string plucked by a hand you can't see. As you step back into the corridor, the door clicks shut behind you, and the hallway darkens again, waiting for the next set of footsteps bold or foolish enough to walk these same floors. You continue forward, deeper into the belly of the Vatican's war years apparatus, where the boundary between service and silence dissolves into thin lines of ink on aging paper, and the gold trail thickens into a fog that neither absolution nor audit can fully clear. You enter a stairwell lit only by the trembling flame of your lantern. The stone steps worn concave from centuries of sandals, leather soles, and polished black shoes with diplomatic immunity. And the further down you descend, the cooler the air becomes, infused with the scent of limestone, damp parchment, and something else. Something like the breath of a locked drawer left unopened for 70 years. The spiral narrows until your shoulder brushes the wall with each turn, And by the time you reach the bottom, the Vatican above feels like a different country, the kind with rules and ceremonies. While down here, in the depths beneath the holy floors, the only law is memory. You step into a vaulted room that hums with dust and silence, and the door clicks shut behind you with the finality of a confessional curtain drawn. Wooden shelves line the walls, their contents organized with obsessive care. Folders, envelopes, rolled maps, all marked with neat Vatican labels from the early 1940s. Each one a small island in an archipelago of things that were never supposed to surface. In the center of the room, a single desk sits beneath a hanging lamp, long extinguished, and your lantern's glow lands on the cracked leather chair behind it, where the dust is so undisturbed you could almost believe the person who once worked here vanished mid-breath. On the desk rests a bound dossier labeled Archivio, Rami non ufficiali, and when you open it, the brittle paper whispers 100 secrets at once. Transcripts of closed-door meetings, unsigned directives, memoranda marked "destroy upon reading," each one written in the bland, precise language of institutional conscience laundering. You turn a page and find a list of names, half faded, half redacted, paired with locations and dates. Some in Rome, some in Salzburg, some in Buenos Aires, and one marked simply Lucca, Silenziato, November 45. Your eyes linger on that last word, silenced, and it lands with a quiet weight, not melodramatic, not cinematic, but bureaucratic, cold, final. The mainstream historical fact pulses in the background like a steady drumbeat. During and after the war, multiple investigators, researchers, and journalists who began asking questions about Vatican financial activity, Nazi collaboration, or missing refugee gold were quietly sidelined, discredited, or in some cases, most notoriously a former OSS liaison, died under suspiciously unresolved circumstances. You close the folder and move to a wall cabinet filled with reel-to-reel tapes, each labeled with initials and numbers. And though you don't have the machine to play them, you recognize the format from post-war surveillance archives, the kind used to record interviews, confessions, or sometimes just hallway whispers that would later be transcribed into deliberately vague intelligence memos. A fringe detail, long dismissed by official sources but never quite silenced, returns with eerie precision. The claim that a mid-ranking Vatican archivist maintained a private collection of audio recordings documenting unfiltered conversations between clergy and Axis diplomats, and that those tapes, when discovered in the 1970s, were quietly absorbed by the Vatican's internal security apparatus and never seen again. You run your fingers along the metal cases, the cold edges pulsing faintly beneath your skin, and you imagine the contents not as recordings, but as voices trapped in tin canisters, waiting for someone foolish enough to open them. In the far corner of the room stands a filing cabinet marked Relazioni Interrotte, 1946, and when you slide open the top drawer, it coughs out the scent of wax seals and iron gall ink. Inside, each folder details a meeting, correspondence chain, or intelligence operation abruptly halted without reason, most marked with one of two codes, RIT for ritirato or SEP for sepolto, the latter literally meaning buried. You pull one at random and read a clipped exchange between a Swiss banker and a Vatican liaison about a shipment of gold supposedly intercepted by Allied forces but never documented in final reports. And the last page of the file is a memo dated September 1946. Reading only, matter closed, no further interest, author deceased. The scholarly debate phrase returns like a cough behind cathedral walls. The suppression of post-war inquiries into ecclesiastical financial involvement remains poorly understood, which is academic speak for too many people stopped asking and too few answers survived. You glance to your left and notice a wooden crate against the wall, newer than the rest of the room but covered in the dust of deliberate neglect. And when you pry it open, inside you find half a dozen rolled blueprints, floor plans, rail schedules, and one particularly sharp diagram labeled Corridoio 2D, Uscita Alternata, that maps a Vatican subcorridor ending in a hatch not listed on any architectural register. You study it, heart steady, and trace the lines to where they intersect with the known wartime train routes you read about earlier. And though nothing confirms the suspicion outright, your instincts tighten. You're holding a physical link between rooms like this and cargo that moved unseen. The lights overhead buzz once, your lantern the only real light now, and you move toward the door at the back of the vault, marked Riservato 1947. It creaks open into another hallway, narrow, more modern, its concrete walls painted with layers of bureaucracy, and your steps echo louder here, as if you're walking into the vacuum of unfiled memory. You don't know whose offices once sat behind the frosted glass doors on either side, but the labels are blank and the doors locked, and your reflection stretches across the glass like a question no one wants to answer. You walk until the hall ends in a stairwell leading up, and with every step, you feel the silence grow behind you. Not the peaceful kind, but the curated, enforced kind, the kind crafted by committees and stamped into invisibility by official seals. When you emerge at the top, blinking into the upper levels again, the Vatican above feels brighter, louder, more alive, but beneath your shoes is a network of memory braided with silence, and you walk forward, knowing you've just passed through one of the most dangerous wings in the entire city, not because of what's kept there, but because of what's no longer allowed to be. You step into a sunlit courtyard framed by pale stone columns and lemon trees planted in terracotta pots, the scent of citrus oddly at odds with the memory-soaked gravity trailing behind you. And for a brief moment, the warmth on your face almost tricks you into thinking the worst of the Vatican's wartime secrets were left behind in the dark. But neutrality doesn't vanish in daylight. It simply puts on a clean robe and walks quietly among the flowers. You walk the perimeter of the courtyard slowly, boots brushing gravel, eyes tracing the soft curve of light across the Vatican's private garden paths, and you remember what this moment represents. Not peace, but image, not silence, but curation. During the Second World War, the Vatican declared itself a neutral sovereign state, a stance that offered diplomatic immunity, freedom of movement, and a convenient cloak for both humanitarian protection and morally ambiguous transactions. This is the mainstream historical fact. Vatican neutrality was official, it was consistent, and it was understood as a shield. But like all shields, it cast shadows. You follow a stone path into a quiet wing of the complex reserved for papal audiences, where velvet curtains dampen footsteps and the furniture gleams with the kind of polish that smells faintly of ceremonial formality, and the air is laced with the echo of decisions that could never be spoken into microphones. As you wander between chambers once used to entertain ambassadors and generals, your lantern hangs at your side more out of habit than necessity now, but its presence feels appropriate, because even in daylight, the ghosts of neutrality are easier to confront by candlelight. Your eyes catch on a framed map hanging crooked on the wall, not decorative but functional, depicting Rome during the war years, with hand-drawn markings in red pencil showing German patrol routes, Allied observation posts, and zones marked safe transit, ecclesiastical use. It's the kind of artifact that speaks softly but carries a scream underneath. You approach a cabinet beside it and pull open the drawer, revealing rows of correspondence between the Vatican and foreign embassies, each letter wrapped in ribbon and sealed with wax, some already cracked, some still intact, as if daring you to disturb them. You slide one open carefully. It's from a Hungarian bishop, dated October 1944. Requesting Vatican assistance in relocating a group of Jewish families hiding in Budapest, claiming they had been marked for immediate extraction. The Vatican reply is formal, non-committal, laden with Latin euphemism. No denial, no approval, just a graceful sidestep dressed in diplomacy. You turn the page and find a note in different handwriting. No public record. Process through cultural channel. That phrase repeats in several more letters. You collect them mentally, one after another, and feel the rhythm of neutral rhetoric building into a kind of invisible code. one where faith was preserved through ambiguity and lives were saved or lost, depending on the political reading of a pronoun. A fringe rumor floats up from the depths of unfiled memory, the theory that certain papal aides constructed an unofficial verbal lexicon during the war, replacing hot-button terms like Jews, Nazis, gold, and escape with more innocuous phrases like pilgrims, visitors, vestments, and journeys. It was never proven, but researchers analyzing Vatican communications from the 1943 to 1945 window discovered linguistic shifts that occurred in sync with changing military occupation lines. You turn away from the cabinet, walking through a tall double door into what looks like a conference room, but simpler, quieter, more like a chessboard painted in fresco and silence. A round table sits at its center, 8 chairs arranged neatly around it, one clearly newer than the others, its leather untorn, its legs free of nicks, and it sits slightly further from the wall than the rest. You don't know why that bothers you until you realize someone sat there last and sat there often. You move closer and notice under the chair a thin thread of paper, a torn corner from a telegram, the edge singed, the date incomplete, but one word is intact: protezione. Protection. Always protection. You tuck the fragment into your notebook and return to the corridor, where daylight still pours in, but where the scent of lemon trees has been replaced by something older. Old stone, old wood, old choices. You climb a staircase into the Apostolic Palace's upper level, where the rooms take on that strangely timeless blend of sacred intimacy and political calculus. Tapestries hang over windows, muting the afternoon light, and inside a study left open by chance or oversight, you find a writing desk with its drawers half full, ink pots, faded photos, and a single newspaper from April 1944. You read the headline in Italian: Il Santo Padre preoccupato per il popolo europeo. The Holy Father concerned for the people of Europe. You flip to the editorial section and find a small column reporting that the Vatican urges peace through spiritual vigilance. The phrase is so polished it nearly shines. The scholarly debate phrase lingers just behind your eyes. The Vatican's consistent public neutrality during World War II is widely acknowledged, but its private political positioning remains disputed, which is a kind way of saying that behind closed doors, neutrality could sometimes look a lot like strategy. You step into another chamber and see a collection of framed photographs. Pius XII greeting envoys, smiling beside bishops, hosting Red Cross officials, but one photo is missing its label. In it, a man in a Wehrmacht uniform, facial features blurred, insignia deliberately obscured, is shaking hands with a Vatican aide in a sun-drenched courtyard that could only be the very one you walked through moments ago. No date, no description. You stare at the photo long enough to memorize it. A knock echoes faintly from deeper in the building. Not a real knock, just a memory bouncing off old marble. And you turn to leave, the echo growing louder the more you ignore it. Down a hallway lined with locked cabinets, one is slightly ajar. Inside, rows of index cards catalog names, most written in pencil, some erased and rewritten, many marked with a single dot or dash in red. The card in front reads Heimlich, F. Vienna, 1943, Hospit. Guest, another card, Goldstein, E. Trieste, 1944, Corrispondenza Spirituale. Spiritual correspondence. You recognize the pattern instantly. These were not pilgrims. These were people. You pull a final drawer and find a ledger marked Pellegrinaggi Straordinari, 1943-45, and inside, a neat list of pilgrimage expenses that includes train ticket reimbursements, cash disbursements, clothing allowances, all listed under religious outreach. You know now that neutrality had an exchange rate, and sometimes it was paid in code. You close the drawer, quietly, letting the soft click echo through the chamber like a bell at dusk. Outside the window, Rome stretches into gold and shadow, and for a moment, you can almost see the war folding in on itself. Nazi tanks parked beside Roman ruins, Swiss accounts pinging from behind cathedral walls, frightened families stepping through basilica doors and not knowing which version of God would greet them. You walk back down the hall, past the mislabeled photo, past the empty chair, past the velvet tapestries hiding sunlight, and you know the ghosts of neutrality are not malevolent. They are procedural, meticulous, and stubborn. They don't haunt with howls, but with footnotes. They linger in erased names and polite refusals, in changed definitions and shuffled documents, and they follow you now as you return to the lantern-lit hallway below, where the next chamber waits with locked drawers, more dots, more dashes, more unfinished names. You move through a low archway carved with quiet restraint, its sandstone edges chipped smooth by centuries of fingers that brushed it while passing silently into the Vatican's least documented chambers. And here, the air is stiller than before. Not colder, not warmer, just suspended, as though time itself stopped to hold its breath during the war and never quite remembered to exhale. A long corridor stretches ahead, lined with doors of uneven sizes, some no taller than a man, some wide enough to roll in a coffin or a cart of hidden crates, and each door bears no number, no title, just keyholes and silence. This is not the wing for ceremony. This is the wing for movement, logistics, the back passages of what Rome called sacred neutrality, but what survivors often remembered as something far more complicated. Sanctuary. Yes, but sanctuary with terms. You walk slowly now, your footsteps muffled by worn brick, and your hand runs along the wall's uneven stone as you pass one doorway after another, each one breathing the memory of footsteps that didn't want to be followed, of desperate travelers cloaked not in cassocks, but in fear. The hallway leads to a stairwell with an iron railing so cold it feels wet, and you descend, step by cautious step, into a vaulted chamber dimly lit by stained glass windows. Narrow, high-set slivers of light filtering down in watery reds and blues. The glow spills across rows of long benches, like pews but without a pulpit, facing not forward but inward, arranged like a council rather than a congregation. At the center of the room is a brass globe, its continents etched in Latin, its seas untitled, and beside it sits a wide table covered in oilcloth and pinned with dozens of yellowing documents, maps of wartime Rome, courier routes, rail schedules, and refugee names partially erased, half recorded, or incorrectly translated in ways that might have saved lives or cost them. You reach down and lift one of the maps. It's marked with blue chalk lines running from the southern coast of Italy through abbeys, rural monasteries, and finally converging near the Vatican wall, terminating at a point labeled simply Cupola. You set it down and lean forward, piecing together what so many historians have tried to decode. How during the war's most feverish months, the Vatican became a transit hub not just for messages or mercy, but for men, money, and motives that refused to define themselves. The mainstream historical fact pulses beneath the mosaic tiles like a heartbeat. During the Nazi occupation of Rome, the Vatican extended protection to thousands of Jews and political refugees by providing forged baptismal certificates, sheltering them in church-owned buildings, and maintaining a fragile but effective diplomatic web that allowed couriers and escapees to move between occupied zones. But what never appears in the bullet points of textbooks is the labyrinth beneath that reality, the smokescreens of titles, the misuse of sacred robes, the dual-purpose corridors where sanctuary and escape tunnel shared the same floor plan. You turn your lantern toward a hallway labeled Archivio di Carità Straordinaria, and the brass letters catch the flicker of light like a mirror of intention. Charity extraordinary, yes, but also charity that wore disguises, that passed messages in the sleeves of cassocks and coded train tickets between psalms. Inside the archive, shelves stretched toward the ceiling, stacked with handwritten ledgers marked with donor initials, itemized shipments, and odd notations, scarves, bread, calcium tablets, followed by parenthetical entries in German, Croatian, and Hungarian. These weren't only supplies, they were signals. Calcium tablets meant a family of 4. Scarves indicated safe passage had been arranged through a diocesan contact in Florence. Bread meant payment was pending and passage was not guaranteed. You trace your finger along the edge of one shelf and find a file labeled Risposta in Codice, 3 Marzo 1944. Its contents sealed in twine, but left unlocked. Inside are 27 postcards, each addressed to different parishes across Europe. Each message written in a mixture of Latin blessings and seemingly mundane religious commentary. But tucked into the bottom corner of each is a tiny printed cipher, just 4 digits long, and historians have long debated whether these correspond to parish codes, prisoner designations, or bank transfer identifiers tied to Swiss intermediaries. A fringe rumor swims up from the darker layers of institutional memory, the claim that the Vatican maintained a hidden diplomatic registry called Mappa Confessionale, a master document not of souls, but of sanctuary, a living list of people deemed too valuable, too politically sensitive, or too wealthy to be captured, and that the Church, either knowingly or through quietly approved intermediaries, facilitated their passage to South America or the Middle East under new names, armed with sacramental papers that transformed war criminals into wandering missionaries. The rumor was denied, of course, but decades later, fragments of that alleged document surfaced in the estate of a deceased Jesuit historian, and though its authenticity was never verified, the layout matched precisely the structure of ecclesiastical birth records, as if someone had bent holy documentation into a tunnel for unholy exits. You push deeper into the archive, past boxes of parchment, past sealed crates with red wax insignias, until you reach a doorway curtained with velvet, the fabric so thick it mutes your breath as you part it. Behind it is a small chamber, no wider than a chapel vestibule, lined with framed black and white photos of wartime priests, most smiling faintly, some wearing medals, some dressed in plain robes. Beneath each is a brass nameplate, but several are missing, their mounts bare. You scan the photos and feel something tighten in your chest. Not fear, not awe, but the sharp realization that you are being watched by men who once held the power to determine fates behind closed doors. On the far wall, a framed quote carved into wood reads, Ubi caritas est, ibi Deus est. Where there is charity, there is God. And below it, faintly etched in the frame, a second phrase, scratched in hurried script, Et ubi Deus est, ibi securitas. And where God is, there is safety. You leave the chamber without touching anything, and the hallway beyond seems colder now. You descend another level into what must have once been storage for vestments. The walls lined with narrow lockers. Inside are boxes labeled not with garments, but with initials and dates. Files, not fabrics. You lift one labeled CR/44/ARA, and inside is a full dossier. Photo, fingerprints, sacramental record, and an escape itinerary routed from Rome to Algiers, then to Buenos Aires via Lisbon. The file includes confirmation of baptism, a new identity certificate issued by a diocesan office in southern Italy, and a letter of introduction signed by a bishop whose name still graces a school in modern Europe. You place the file back and stare at the box for a moment, understanding that this archive is not a relic. It is a machine, and it was built to run smoothly, efficiently, discreetly, all in the name of spiritual necessity. The scholarly debate phrase vibrates in the walls. The Vatican's involvement in wartime refugee networks remains a complex intersection of moral aid and political facilitation, which is the clean version. The dirty version lives in these boxes. Back upstairs, you pass a doorway that opens slightly into a garden gallery, the sunlight slanting in through painted glass, and outside, you see tourists moving in packs, laughing softly, snapping pictures of statues that once loomed over corridors full of whispered names and vanished cargo. The garden path curves around a stone fountain where pigeons gather, unbothered by the weight of history, and for a moment, the Vatican looks exactly how it wants to be seen, eternal, calm, clean. But beneath that perfection, the smoke screens linger, Coded documents labeled as catechisms, forged baptismal papers sealed by tired bishops, missing pages from transport manifests, priests who disappeared right before tribunals. You walk through the garden with the soft rhythm of someone still carrying the dust of archives on their skin, and as you pass a statue of St. Peter, your eyes catch on the key in his hand, not decorative, not symbolic, but literal. The Church has always held keys. The question is never whether they unlock truth. The question is who gets to use them and why some doors are never meant to open again. You reach the edge of the path where a narrow corridor disappears beneath a covered walkway, and you follow it, letting the last of the sunlight fade behind you. At the end of the path is a small chapel closed to the public, its doors unmarked. You slip inside. The space is dark, the air full of candle wax and age, and behind the altar stands a wall covered not in art, but in names, etched in rows, year by year, like a roll call of the disappeared. You step closer, reading names you've seen before, in files, in ledgers, in telegrams, and some names are missing vowels, some are abbreviated, some end in ellipses, as if the stonecutters were interrupted. You stand in the hush, your lantern dimming, and understand that this room is not a memorial. It's a ledger carved in stone, recording not only the saved, but the smoke screens, the unnamed, the unprosecuted, the quietly erased. You turn, step back into the corridor, and the sanctuary closes behind you like a curtain at the end of an old play, where the actors never bowed and the audience was told to forget they were ever there. And yet, the stage remains. The lights still burn low, and the scent of incense cannot cover the echo of what passed through here under the banner of faith, protection, and plausible charity. You walk now through the Vatican's administrative halls, where the ceilings press lower and the tapestries vanish, replaced by painted plaster and scuffed wood doors bearing initials instead of titles. Offices once occupied by secretaries, liaison officers, archivists, and papal diplomats whose names appear nowhere in the public glossaries of church history, but whose fingerprints are all over the most delicate bargains struck during the war. These corridors were not designed for ceremony. They were designed for speed, for quiet communication, for the passage of envelopes and the clink of cups filled with cautious coffee as emissaries from every side of the conflict waited in chairs just like the one you pass now. Worn leather, faded red, the fabric on the armrest thumb worn from tension. The Vatican had no army, it had no tanks, but it had what every war eventually wants: legitimacy, discretion, and access. And those three commodities became currency as the Allies closed in on Italy, as the Nazis scrambled to consolidate their power, and as individuals, not regimes, began striking deals to secure the only thing that mattered more than gold: survival. You step into a reading room lit by a single high window, dust curling in the afternoon light like incense, and the long table at the center of the room is bare except for a thick binder that appears to have been left behind, intentionally or by mistake. You can't tell, but its spine reads Acta Confidentia, 1945. You open it. Inside are copies of diplomatic communiques stamped with the seals of neutral embassies, Switzerland, Portugal, Argentina, and on the top page is a letter drafted by a Vatican intermediary to a banking representative in Lisbon, requesting delicate processing of cultural assets in accordance with established privileges. There's no mention of gold or currency or even ownership, but the phrase established privileges shows up 3 more times, each time in reference to people whose names were quietly replaced with initials: KR, BF, GM, followed by vague references to transport schedules and exchange rates. The mainstream historical fact rises like a whisper through stone. In the final months of the Second World War, church officials engaged in direct negotiations, both documented and undocumented, with fleeing Nazi officers, collaborators, and select Axis industrialists, exchanging logistical support or bureaucratic silence in return for assurances of religious protection, political access, or information that could be leveraged post-war. These were not coordinated Vatican policy. They were fragmented deals, brokered in side rooms, in chapels, in embassies, bargains no one wanted to acknowledge but too many were willing to make. You turn the page. A memo reads, Transit of persons identified by the Congregazione. Measures to ensure continuity of pastoral function abroad. It doesn't say who these persons were, but attached is a rail schedule matching the same Austrian-Italian route used for military gold transports. You step back from the binder and stare at the table, understanding now that some of the most dangerous trades during the war weren't for wealth, but for silence, and sometimes silence bought other people's lives. The fringe rumor that floats into your awareness now is one long whispered by researchers and archivists in hushed corners of European conferences. The story of the Jesuit package, a supposed set of files prepared in 1944 and delivered by Vatican diplomats to Allied intelligence, allegedly detailing Nazi troop movements, civilian atrocities, and black market gold stashes in exchange for a promise that no public statements would be made about the Vatican's wartime role until long after the war ended. The rumor was dismissed, of course, but a footnote in a declassified British file from 1981 mentions a confidential Jesuit account obtained early 1945, basis for multiple shifts in negotiation posture. You move to a wall cabinet and find it unlocked. Inside are folders marked Incontri Straordinari, 1943 to 1946, each detailing meetings that don't appear on official Vatican calendars. German diplomats arriving after curfew, Croatian Ustaše envoys bringing gifts of goodwill, and Allied envoys seeking passage through church-controlled sectors. One document, dated January 1945, contains a meeting transcript, notes only, between a Vatican official and an unnamed former SS officer requesting non-interference in personal departure in exchange for documents of value to future reconciliation. You pause, reading it again. The phrasing is so clean, so neutral, that it almost sounds righteous, but the next page lists a bank account number in Zurich and a routing path through Buenos Aires. Not charity, not absolution, transaction. You leave the cabinet and step into an adjoining chamber, once used for diplomatic receptions. The walls are lined with portraits of cardinals, most of them stern-faced, robed, their hands folded as if to remind the viewer that they were above suspicion. But in the center of the room is a portrait unlike the others, unsigned, unlabeled, but unmistakably different. The man is in plain clothes, seated at a desk, his eyes fixed directly on the viewer. There's no warmth, no serenity, just calculation. You wonder who painted it. You wonder who removed the name. And you wonder whether this man smiled while arranging the kind of bargain that could remove a name from history. You walk toward a table covered in aged folders marked Confessioni di Transito and open one, a list of names and dates, many with ND beside them. No data, no detail, but some marked with destination countries: Spain, Brazil, Egypt, Syria. Several names are struck through with red ink, others double underlined in blue. You recognize 3 from previous documents, all linked to known collaborators who vanished in 1945, never tried, never named in post-war tribunals. At the back of the folder is a typed letter in German, stamped persönlich, warning of the fragile status of the arrangements previously guaranteed by the apostolic intermediary. The last line, delay in exfiltration, may lead to exposure and undesirable retrospection. The scholarly debate phrase scratches at the edge of your mind. The Vatican's post-war resettlement assistance remains underexplored in relation to individual cases of exfiltrated war criminals, which is a polite academic way of saying, we know what happened, but we don't know how to prove it without access to the other boxes. You step out of the chamber and into a narrow hallway filled with boxed religious artifacts, paintings, relics, sacramental robes, all labeled Donato 1943 to 45. But you notice a strange pattern. Every label includes initials not matching known donors. And in one crate, instead of a relic, you find a bundle of passports, some blank, some forged, some half filled out with names crossed and rewritten. Each carries a Vatican seal. Each includes a new date of baptism. These weren't pilgrims. These were exits. You make your way toward a final room, this one barred by a curtain of chainmail that rattles gently as you pass through. Inside, the air grows cooler, quieter. Here the documents are older, brittle, more ceremonial. But hidden between the layers of theological prose are handwritten notes, notes written in red ink, notes written on letterhead marked with the Vatican's diplomatic seal, but bearing phrases that now feel chilling in their neutrality. Assets in motion. Hold until transfer approved. Right complete. Advised through spiritual intermediary. You read these lines and understand that the war was not only fought with bombs, it was fought with paper, and the Vatican, by virtue of its timeless trust, its borderless reach, its moral immunity, was one of the few players capable of moving through every side without being stopped. That power created possibilities, and possibilities created bargains. You turn to leave. The hallway behind you seems longer now, as if stretched by the tension of decades of hidden deals. And as your lantern flickers low, the shadows on the walls grow taller. Not monstrous, not ghostly, but human. Tall enough to wear robes, tall enough to sign papers, tall enough to vanish when the light returned. You don't stop walking. You can't. Because if you stay too long in the room where the bargains were made, you start to feel the weight of decisions that were never yours to carry, and yet by reading them, you do. You return to the surface through a narrow stairwell, each stone step pushing against your heels like the stubborn weight of memory itself. And when you emerge into a hallway that smells of polished wood, beeswax, and something sharper, ink perhaps, or lingering regret, you find yourself in a wing of the Vatican rarely mentioned in guidebooks, where the frescoes are not magnificent but subdued, the statues more severe than graceful, and the windows are fewer, smaller, as if the very architecture was built to prevent light from revealing what rests inside. Ahead of you, a door creaks open under your palm, its hinges whispering against the silence, and you step into a room where the Vatican's past is not just remembered but reluctantly preserved. This is the Registro Incompleto, the unofficial name whispered among clerks and junior archivists, the place where documentation that cannot be destroyed, but cannot safely exist in the open either, is stored in shadowed perpetuity. And here, behind thick glass and locked cases, is where the story bends toward the unspoken. The air is drier in this chamber, artificially preserved for fragile parchment and brittle paper, but the moment you inhale it, your body recognizes something else layered within, that faint metallic tinge you've smelled in other forbidden rooms, something like rusted gold or oxidized blood, a sensory echo of things once hidden inside the folds of false identities, misdirected train logs, and sacramental envelopes. The lantern in your hand throws soft, almost reverent light across shelves of gray boxes stacked like tombs, each labeled not with subjects, but with ciphered initials and Gregorian dates. The mainstream historical fact sharpens around you like a quiet bell tone. Though many of the Vatican's wartime archives were partially opened in 2020 under Pope Francis's directive, a significant portion remains sealed, missing, or uncatalogued. Not because of defiance, but because no one has yet found a way to safely explain their contents without unraveling narratives far more fragile than paper. You move to a central cabinet made of black walnut, its drawers sealed not with locks, but with wax stamps, some partially broken, some still whole, the red ceilings cracked like dried wounds. You choose one at random, drawer C, year 1944, and break the seal with the edge of a rusted key you found earlier, still cold from the archives beneath the monastic chambers. Inside the drawer is a slim folder labeled Referenze Scomodi, a phrase which translates loosely to inconvenient references, and the handwriting beneath it is looping, nervous. You open it to find photocopies of bank transfer sheets, not originals. Someone clearly tried to destroy them, but the paper refuses to disappear. The details are blurry but legible enough to extract a series of dates and institutions: Deutsche Bank, Banco di Roma, Credit Suisse. The amounts are obscured, but the receiving parties are curiously vague. R. Congregazione, CR. and FSP beneficiari. You pause at the acronyms. The first corresponds to a known ecclesiastical order with deep ties to wartime Italy. The second has no direct match but is believed, by several historians working in whispered collaboration, to refer to a protection network for fleeing fascist officers disguised as charitable pilgrims. One fringe account slides into your memory now: the bizarre, persistent tale of a Jesuit priest who, after the war, allegedly confessed on his deathbed to maintaining a secret directory of unburnable documents, records stored in 4 separate monastic outposts across Italy, each encoded in ciphered Latin, and each protected by a vow not of silence, but of deliberate ambiguity. The priest's claim was dismissed by officials at the time, labeled apocryphal, but the coordinates he allegedly gave were later found to correspond to 4 actual archival anomalies, locations where file inventories and physical records didn't align by more than 50%. You place the transfer sheets back into the drawer and move on, heart slow and steady, as though your pulse has adjusted itself to match the hush of the room. Another drawer yields a worn black notebook bound in twine, its cover labeled Memory non letta, unread memories. The first entry is dated June 1943 and begins in German. Angekommen in Rom mit 5 Kisten, arrived in Rome with 5 crates. There is no name, only a set of initials, AK, and a scrawl of a symbol beside them, a tiny gold cross overlaid on an iron wheel, the insignia of a defunct Croatian military order whose surviving members disappeared shortly after the war. You flip the page. There are lists of names, 2 columns, Entladen and Verloren, unloaded and lost. In the margin of one entry, circled in red pencil, is a phrase in Latin: corpus non judicatum, the body untried. You recognize the term from theological studies, but here, in this context, it reads more like a cold, bureaucratic euphemism for someone deliberately excluded from tribunal records. The implication is brutal and quiet. Not every escapee was lost. Some were erased before they could even be identified. You move toward the vault at the back of the room, a curved iron door with a handle shaped like a bishop's crook, and inside is a circular archive filled with shelves that wrap the room like a spiral. Here, the organization is older, more chaotic, and more human. Notes folded inside prayer books, photographs slipped between pages of theological journals, and fragments of carbon paper labeled non registrato. You find a box marked Incendi, 1946, and inside are half-charred documents, burned along the edges but not fully consumed, rescue lists, shipment logs, a ledger page with a Vatican crest, half melted by flame. And as you hold the page under your lantern light, you see something peculiar: names that appear on no refugee rosters, but match exactly the aliases later associated with Argentine immigration records between 1947 and 1953. The burn marks cut through most of the identifying details, but the few that survive align too closely for coincidence. Someone tried to destroy these pages, but fire, like history, is not always thorough. Some documents refuse to burn. You step back and your eyes land on a smaller folder wedged between hymnals, unlabeled, tied with string. Inside, you find 10 photographs, grainy but real. Priests in plainclothes, men shaking hands in alleyways, passing packages in rail stations, boarding ships. One photo has been slashed diagonally, almost through the middle, but the face is still visible. A man who appears in other documents under 3 separate aliases, all tied to war crimes investigations that never resulted in charges. The photo's reverse reads, Luogo sicuro raggiunto. Ringraziamento a S.E.G. A safe place reached, with thanks to His Excellency G. No surname, just the suggestion of power, invisible and unaccountable. The scholarly debate phrase that floats over all of this like a veil soaked in incense is one you've read before in published journals and whispered forums. The fate of numerous compromised Vatican wartime files remains undetermined, raising questions about internal decisions regarding selective preservation. You feel its meaning now more clearly than ever, not as an abstract academic puzzle, but as a living uncertainty, heavy and breathing. You glance back at the burned folder labeled Incendi and realize it is only one of several. The others remain unmarked, quiet, waiting for hands that have not yet come. You walk slowly around the vault's edge, noting the patterns. Folders with red wax were protected. Folders with black wax were destroyed and rebuilt. Folders with no seals were simply forgotten. One last shelf catches your eye. It bears a label not in Latin or Italian, but in Spanish. Dispariciones útiles, useful disappearances. Inside is a typed index of names and countries, mostly Latin American, Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Brazil. A handwritten note accompanies each, often with the phrase documenti forniti, documents provided. Some pages include a Vatican letterhead, most do not. One entry reads, Hoffman, J.A., Buenos Aires, 1951, tutti I documenti approvati, baptism, Basilica Lateranense, Roma, retrodatato. A baptism certificate backdated, issued in the most senior church in all of Christendom. The weight of it all settles into your lungs, not panic, not grief, but that heavy, slow realization that some files are not just paper and ink, they are decisions. They are the final act of deals struck in darkness. They are the invoices of moral compromise. And they persist, not because they were saved, but because they could not be safely destroyed. You return the documents carefully. You close the drawers. You tie the folders shut again. And as you back out of the vault, the iron door swings softly shut, not with violence, but with finality. The air outside feels thin, metallic. The lantern light flickers lower. And as you walk away from the registro incompleto, the corridor seems to narrow behind you. Not physically, but emotionally, like history gently closing the door to a room you were never supposed to find, but the documents remain. They always do, the ones that refuse to burn. You walk with slower steps now, not out of fatigue, but reverence, as if your body instinctively knows that the halls you're entering are not filled with books or scrolls or ledgers, but with the absence of something greater, consequences. The corridor ahead is narrower than the rest, with gray marble walls and tall arched doorways, each one closed with ornate hinges, their ironwork shaped like vines wrapping around a crucifix. Every few feet a plaque appears, etched not with the names of saints or martyrs, but with the names of committees. Commissione per la Giustizia Ecclesiastica, Congregatio de Causa Rationabilis, Curia di Arbitraggio Straordinario. These were not tribunals of faith. These were response mechanisms, deliberation chambers for ethical containment. You pass beneath one arch inscribed with non omnia judicantur, not everything is judged, and the truth of that phrase rolls like slow thunder through the base of your spine. Ahead of you stands a heavy walnut door left ajar, its brass handle warm in your palm, and when you push it open, you find a large circular chamber, candlelit, quiet, the walls ringed with benches upholstered in faded red velvet. This is no courtroom. This is a room built for deciding what would not become a courtroom, a judgment chamber for determining which events were too dangerous, too politically fragile, or too morally complex to drag into daylight. This is where silence was not just enforced, but designed. Your footsteps vanish beneath the high domed ceiling, and the silence is so deep it becomes its own kind of sound, a sound like a held breath that lasted through decades. In the center of the chamber stands a polished wooden table. Upon it rests a single black book bound in leather and closed with a ribbon. There is no title, no crest, no classification stamp, just the weight of it. You open the book carefully, the pages thick and yellowing, and on the first leaf is a phrase written in sharp Latin script, causae transiuntes, transitory cases. What follows is not a list of crimes, but a list of names. Each entry occupies a single page. Each begins with a file number and a year. Most fall between 1943 and 1955. And under each year is a name, sometimes with an alias in parentheses. There is no description of their offense, only two categories: Intentio Sancta and Negotium Expeditum. The first loosely translates to holy intention, the second to matter expedited. You read the first name, Heinrich L., alias Padre Lazzaro, a date of entry into Italy, a note of baptism, an annotation, Epistolae Communis, suppressa per decreto, the common letters suppressed by decree. This is the mainstream historical fact that threads through this room like incense through cathedral rafters. No formal tribunal was ever established by the Vatican to investigate or publicly acknowledge the assistance offered to Nazi fugitives, collaborators, or Axis-aligned financiers fleeing Europe after the war. While external courts, Nuremberg, The Hague, and post-war commissions documented crimes and prosecuted perpetrators, the Church remained externally silent and internally fragmented, issuing no systemic confession, no uniform apology, no definitive reckoning. And so, here in this room, where the silence feels centuries thick, you begin to understand that what you're holding is not an archive. It's a roster of ghosts who never saw trial. You flip to another page. Franz R., alias G.R. Benedetti. Date of baptism: February 1946. Ordained under a falsified identity. Final annotation: Posizione est conclusa. Iter in Chile approbato, case closed. Journey to Chile approved. Another name, another escape, another moral thread untied before the world could see it fray. You set the book down and breathe in the room. Every wall here has heard negotiations disguised as confessions, deliberations dressed as prayers, and legal absolutions veiled as theological mercy. And somewhere within this same Vatican wing lives the rumor that has echoed through every scholar's whispered frustration, the claim that a formal trial was proposed, not publicly, not loudly, but in the winter of 1946, when internal factions within the Curia urged the formation of a private tribunal to address what one cardinal allegedly referred to as the crisis of post-apostolic compromise. The proposal, according to fringe reports buried in university archives, included 6 accused individuals, 4 facilitators, and 1 supervising bishop. The trial was never convened. Instead, the internal documents were filed under causa incompleta, and the committee was disbanded before spring. You walk toward a tall filing cabinet in the corner of the chamber, its wood carved with cherubs and acanthus leaves, and pull open the top drawer. Inside are folders marked Corrispondenza Urgente, 1945-47. You remove one and unfold a letter dated October 1945 from the Apostolic Nuncio in Switzerland. It reads, "The party in question has been advised to make use of the Church's extraterritorial protections. Discussions of culpability remain premature, given the fragility of post-war stability." A second letter follows. Considerations for moral restitution are best handled through private sacramental counsel rather than public judgment. You pause, reread that line, and realize that what you're seeing is not an institutional failing. It's an institutional design. The next folder contains testimony, handwritten, dated April 1947. The statement of a Vatican-employed translator who witnessed the reissuance of documents under forged baptismal identities for 2 men with known war crime connections. His note ends with a line in Latin, "Delatum est, non judicatum." It was reported, not judged. You place the letters back. You close the drawer. And you understand, more fully now, that this room, this sanctified space of non-judgment, became a critical node in the post-war church. A sanctum not for absolution, but for absolving the need for accountability altogether. You walk into the adjoining chamber where small wooden chairs are arranged in a semicircle beneath a ceiling mural of the Last Judgment. The figures in the painting are exquisite, expressive, detailed. But one detail stands out. In this rendering, there are no devils, no demons, just human faces, some frightened, some calm, some staring blankly into eternity. You sit in one of the chairs, feeling the curve of the wood press into your back, and across from you, on a raised pedestal, sits a black cassock folded neatly atop a plain white cloth. Atop it, a gold cross. No label. no plaque, just presence. It's the scholarly debate phrase that whispers now, almost embarrassed. The lack of ecclesiastical legal processes post-1945 concerning wartime complicity has led to significant gaps in institutional memory and moral clarity. You stare at the folded cassock, you imagine the man who wore it. You imagine his hands, signing papers, holding keys, speaking Latin with a warm smile while redirecting investigators to already closed files. You rise and pass through a curtain into a final archive, where every box bears the same red wax seal, unbroken. These are the causae mute, silent cases. Each box weighs heavier than it should, and none of them are numbered. Instead, they bear the iconography of countries: Germany, Hungary, Croatia, Austria, Argentina. Each country, a site of origin or destination. You run your hand across the box labeled Croatia. Its surface is warm, as if touched recently. You don't open it. You simply listen. Inside that box are names, surely, testimonies, notations, but also silence, thick enough to feel. You walk backward from the shelves, never turning your back on them, and as you exit through the hall of non-trials, you hear it. Not voices, not ghosts, but the soft scrape of parchment against wood as the past adjusts itself quietly behind you, as if to say, the trial never happened. But the record of its absence is always present, and that absence is louder than any gavel ever dropped. The corridor you now follow is wider, brighter, polished in a way that doesn't reflect light so much as diffuse it, as if even illumination must be carefully managed here. Not sharp, not blinding, just soft enough to suggest transparency without ever quite delivering it. This is the wing of outward-facing operations, the departments that handle Vatican foreign missions, financial outreach, cultural restoration projects, and transcontinental logistical cooperation, a term so deliberately bland that its most significant work has never been spoken aloud. You walk past rooms where clerks once wrote letters in 7 languages, responding to inquiries from Buenos Aires, São Paulo, Asunción, Santiago, Montevideo, cities that in the 1950s suddenly began receiving European immigrants with suspiciously crisp baptismal papers and vaguely noble surnames. A large wooden door opens into what appears to be a diplomatic receiving room, with tall glass cabinets containing ornate gifts from foreign dignitaries, chalices, paintings, silk vestments, ivory crucifixes, but tucked beneath one glass case is a flat portfolio labeled simply Inventarium, Itineraria Beneficia, 1947 to 1953. You open it slowly, the leather cover creaking, and find not lists of donations or parish assignments, but annotated shipping manifests, all itemized by weight and destination. They describe not artifacts or food, but technical freight, artisanal deposits, non-native metals, and always routed from Rome through Lisbon or Genoa, then onward via steamer or air freight to select destinations in South America. One entry, dated October 1949, stands out. Consignment, 212 kilograms, Valencia, São Paulo, via Vatican diplomatic cargo. Declaration sealed under Pax Ecclesiae Accord. You recognize the weight, not of items, but of gold. You flip forward and see variations of the same transaction, slightly different quantities, different points of departure, but always the same destination network, always the same authorization code, PE 1947, a classified financial accord established post-war to allow charitable reconstruction abroad through non-traceable channels. The mainstream historical fact settles over your shoulders like a cloak. By the late 1940s, large amounts of unaccounted-for wartime gold, some looted from Jewish families, banks, and national treasuries during the Nazi regime, began to reappear in various forms: coins, bars, art objects, within South American markets, laundering systems, and banks. Much of it was never officially traced, never legally reclaimed. and a portion is believed to have transited through neutral states, religious institutions, and discrete financial proxies. As you turn another page, you find a telegram transcript between a bishop in Rosario and a Vatican liaison discussing the arrival of items related to ecclesiastical stabilization fund, followed by a curious line: ensure that the recipient avoids publicized conversion of mineral assets until third fiscal quarter. The phrasing is cold, technical, and utterly devoid of spiritual content, and that is precisely the point. You move into an adjoining room where the air is heavier, more humid, the ceiling lower. The walls here are filled with maps, not political maps, but shipping and trade charts, overlaid with red lines, black dots, and gold ink annotations that shimmer in the lantern light. One map in particular draws your attention. It shows Europe and South America, connected by a spiderweb of sea routes, air paths, and rail links converging through Lisbon, Casablanca, Naples, and Vatican City. Across it are scrawled dozens of initials: RC, FML, GH, MB, with no explanation, but if you've been reading closely, you already recognize half of them from ledger footnotes and coded letters buried in the silent wings of the archives. You trace a gold path from Zagreb to Rome, then across the Atlantic to a small port outside Buenos Aires, and you understand that this is not simply a map, it's a confession. A confession drawn in quiet strokes, wrapped in ecclesiastical authority, and preserved not to be seen, but never quite destroyed. A fringe account returns now with terrible clarity. The claim that a hidden Vatican office known colloquially as La Curia d'Oro, the Golden Curia, maintained internal records of all such asset relocations for discrete spiritual reallocation, and that these records were stored not within the Vatican itself, but across several dioceses in South America, buried beneath decades of charitable mission files. This rumor was never verified, but the weight of the map before you tells you otherwise. You open a nearby cabinet marked Archivio Economico, Missioni Speciali, and find a drawer filled with letters on delicate blue paper. Each letterhead is from a different South American bishopric. Each letter is addressed to the same office in the Vatican, and each contains a thank you message, not for spiritual guidance or humanitarian relief, but for relocated instruments of patrimonial sustenance, financial channels opened via intercontinental clerical accord, and most damningly, material transition completed under oath as per the Pax Concordata. These aren't euphemisms. These are financial transfers, asset confirmations, and cleanup operations disguised in the robes of missionary work. You run your finger across one closing signature: Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, M.E. The initials match a Jesuit missionary known to have worked with post-war refugee relocations in Brazil, his name appearing in no less than 7 redacted investigations. The scholarly debate phrase breathes down your neck like cold wind from an open tomb. The transfer of high-value materials post-Waitu under church authority remains insufficiently documented, and the line between spiritual restoration and asset laundering remains historically blurred. You do not need confirmation. You are holding the blur in your hands, and it is heavy. It weighs the same as gold. You step into the last room of this wing, one with tall arched windows looking south across Rome. In the center stands a round table. On it, a globe. The kind used not to teach geography, but to plan it. Etched into the globe are not countries, but shipping hubs, ports, airstrips, consulates, and beside each, a number. No legend explains them, but one note lies beside the globe on Vatican stationery, unsigned, Nota Bene. All ex-military assets to be processed through ecclesiastical pathways by Q3 Swiss intermediaries confirm compliance pending Geneva assurance. You stare at the note. Your eyes read it twice, and you know. This was not haphazard. This was not accidental. This was a system, and it functioned well enough that decades later, its trail still glows faintly beneath the dust. On the wall to your left is a painting, modern, surrealist, oddly out of place in this institution of ancient images. It depicts a ship at sea surrounded not by waves but by ledgers, receipts, wax seals, and Latin prayers. Above the ship, instead of sails, hangs a golden halo. You understand the painting immediately. It is not irony. It is theology weaponized as logistics. You step closer and notice, faintly embedded into the paint at the bottom corner, the name of the artist. You know it, a former monastic artist who vanished in 1962, rumored to have kept a private diary of what was actually painted during the post-war years. The Vatican denies ever commissioning the piece. But here, it hangs. You leave the room. You walk through the corridor once more, and behind you, the maps, the letters, the globe, all remain, silent, undeniable. You pass another office, this one closed, its door locked, its nameplate removed, but carved into the doorframe in tiny, elegant Latin are 5 words: Ubi aurum, ibi transitio, where there is gold, there is passage. And in that phrase lies the heart of this entire chapter. The trail never ends, not in Rome, not in Buenos Aires, not in the burned boxes or the sealed vaults. It winds through sermons and shipping containers, through clerical robes and customs declarations, through silence and sanctimony, and though it may fade, it does not disappear. Because gold always remembers the hands that carried it. And some hands wear rings of power shaped like crosses. You return to the central Vatican complex through a long hallway paved in alternating stripes of white and gray marble. The light here so still and controlled it feels less like illumination and more like permission. Permission to see just enough, never too much. There's no noise now, but the gentle brushing of your steps against stone, and as you move, you pass through a procession of statues lining the walls, not of saints or martyrs, but of anonymous ecclesiastical figures, broad-shouldered men with no names on their plinths, holding scrolls, crosses, or keys, always keys. One in particular holds a pair of them, crossed at the stem and angled toward the earth, as if unlocking something buried far below. You stop and stare, your breath catching slightly in the dry air, and you realize that this whole journey, through ledgers and vaults that were never supposed to be ledgers, has been about that symbol, not salvation, not faith, but access. The final room is beneath the papal library, tucked behind a side hall where tourists are never allowed and cardinals pass without eye contact. It has no sign, no guards, no ceremony, just a heavy door, older than the ones that came before it, made of blackened oak, banded in iron. A single gold keyhole rests at its center. Around it, etched so finely it's nearly invisible, are the Latin words, in omnibus custodibus unius clavis. Among all guardians, there is one key, and you know, without being told, that this is not metaphor. You produce the small brass key taken earlier, unlabeled, unimpressive, left behind like an oversight. It slips in silently, the mechanism stiff at first, but then turning with a weightless grace, as if relieved to finally be asked to do its work again after so many decades. The door groans open into darkness. You step inside. The room is round, no windows. The air is cool and dry with that unmistakable archival purity, dustless, untouched, preserved for paper more than people. Along the circular wall are shelves, arranged like clockwork spokes, and in the very center of the room stands a pedestal with a single book upon it, bound in deep green leather, thick and heavy, sealed with a braided cord tied into a knot that is not just decorative but ritualistic. On the cover, burned into the leather in gold, Translatio Ultima, the final transfer. You approach slowly, every footstep absorbed by the carpeted floor, the silence so complete now that you can hear your own heartbeat as if it belongs to someone else. You untie the knot. The cord falls away. The book opens without resistance. Inside, a single sheet per page, each handwritten in dark ink with clinical precision. It begins with a preface, unsigned. This volume is not to be indexed, quoted, or reproduced. It is not for theological review, nor is it for diplomatic preservation. It is a record of passage, and that alone. The first page details a gold shipment, 64.7 kilograms, transferred from a monastery in Austria to a holding location under ecclesiastical jurisdiction but outside customary diocesan authority. The date, July 18, 1944. The destination, unlisted. The authorization, CCD, verbal only. That abbreviation appears repeatedly throughout the book. Collegium Custodum Discreta, a rumored inner group within the Vatican said to have operated independently from all known congregations, answerable only to the Pope and 2 appointed cardinals. The very existence of such a group has always been disputed, denied, and ultimately categorized as unprovable folklore. And yet, page after page, there it is. Each entry is a logistical ghost. Consignment 003A, confirmed delivery via Genoa, verified by apostolic courier, receiver's identity withheld per internal concordat. Or consignment 009F, 112 kilograms, marked as liturgical restoration fund, actual content not disclosed, forwarded via neutral vessel under ecclesiastical emblem. Not once does the book use the word gold, but you know it, you feel it, each weight, each coded reference, each location, always southward, always across the sea. Near the middle of the book, you turn to a page thicker than the rest, a document pasted into the binding, a typewritten agreement in Portuguese, stamped in 3 places with ecclesiastical seals and signed by a Monsignor whose name you recognize from earlier manifests. It authorizes the creation of sub-institutional holdings in São Paulo, allowing the transfer of endowed reserves from Italy to Brazil under the auspices of spiritual continuity and preservation of European clerical structure. The term spiritual continuity is used 4 times, each in place of what any banker would call laundering. You flip forward, the names begin to change. Gone are the Austrian and German senders. Now, there are initials from Hungary, from Croatia, from Belgium, even from Vichy, France. You read one line 3 times before it sinks in. Transfer of ecclesiastical assets to pre-cleared institution, verified under direction of S.E. Pacelli. Pacelli, the birth name of Pope Pius XII. This isn't hearsay. This isn't archival ambiguity. This is instruction. You turn the page again, and suddenly, the entries grow erratic. Dates repeat, locations skip back and forth. Amounts are revised in the margins. Some lines are struck through in red ink. Some are followed by the chilling Latin phrase, perdita in transitu, lost in transit. One entry simply reads, special delivery, anonymous authorization, recipient confirmed deceased prior to receipt, asset unaccounted. No amount listed, no source. Only that phrase again, verified by apostolic courier. You flip to the next page, then the next. The entries taper off. The handwriting grows shakier. The final 2 pages are blank. No ink, no numbers. Just faint indentations, as if the pen hovered but could not finish. You close the book and step back. The air feels thinner now. The silence more alert. You've read the end of something that was never meant to be read. And it doesn't scream, it doesn't accuse. It waits. The lantern light catches something on the wall behind the pedestal. A mirror, small and old, its glass warped. You see yourself in it, but not just yourself. You see the record keeper, the monk who never slept, the clerk who delivered the unsigned letters, the bishop who passed the envelope, the courier who said nothing, the silence behind every door you've passed through, and in that mirror, all of them become one. There's no sound but the ticking of an old clock hidden in the architecture above the minute hand moves. The gold trail ends. You step back into the corridor. The door closes softly behind you. No lock clicks. No alarms trigger. Because the Vatican does not need to lock what no one dares open. You walk through the final hallway with steady breath, the marble tiles colder now, the saints in the stained glass offering neither blessing nor blame. You pass through the bronze arch marked expectatio et silentium, expectancy and silence, and understand that these 2 principles govern not just faith, but forgetting. You reach the courtyard where it all began. The lemon trees still sway in the Roman breeze. The pigeons still peck at the fountain's edge. Tourists walk by on the other side of the wall, their cameras clicking, their voices rising in cheerful confusion. But you carry the weight, the gold trail, the keys, the vault that did not scream when opened, only waited. And now, your eyes grow heavy. The rhythm of your breath slows. The warmth of the Roman afternoon wraps around your shoulders like a faded cloak. And though the story has unraveled, though the pages have been turned and the names half spoken, there is nothing more to chase, nothing more to decode. The secrets of the Vatican and the Nazis, of hidden gold and forgotten crimes, no longer rush toward the light. They simply rest in the dark, in books that refuse to burn, in rooms that do not echo. Let your eyelids drift lower. Let the breath deepen. Let the story settle. You are safe now. No more footsteps. No more names. Just the quiet pulse of truth beneath stone, beneath scripture, beneath centuries. Let the silence cradle you. Let the darkness hold. End of script. Sweet dreams.